The diner smelled like old grease and burnt coffee, the kind of smell that settled into the vinyl booths and clung to clothes long after you left. The fluorescent lights hummed above, buzzing faintly like tired insects, flickering just enough to remind everyone how run down the place really was. But to Emily tonight, it had to be more than enough. She smoothed the folded 20 and crumpled 10 she had pulled from her wallet earlier, pressing them flat under her palm against the sticky tabletop. $30. That was it. $30 to give her twins a birthday memory that wouldn't feel like poverty had written it. "Mommy, is the cake coming?" little Ava asked, her brown curls springing around her face as she bounced in her seat. "Soon, sweetheart," Emily said, painting a smile onto her lips. Her throat felt tight, but she kept her voice light. "They just need to light the candles." Beside her, Noah, always the quieter of the two, clutched his toy car, spinning the wheels against the tabletop. "Do you think we can have balloons too?" he whispered, his eyes wide, hopeful. Emily's chest tightened. She had seen the small helium balloons clustered near the counter earlier, but she hadn't asked the price. She knew better. $30 had to stretch to cake slices, and maybe 2 small burgers for the twins. "Nothing more, maybe next year," she murmured, brushing Noah's hair back from his forehead. He didn't protest, but the way his shoulders slumped made her ache. She forced another smile. "Tonight we have something even better. Candles and wishes. That's the most important part." The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a crooked name tag that read Darlene, shuffled over with a chipped plate carrying a single, small, round cake. It wasn't really a birthday cake, just a plain vanilla one from the cooler, topped with a squiggle of icing and 2 thin candles stuck haphazardly into the top. Darlene gave Emily a sympathetic glance. She must have read everything in her face. The rehearsed smile, the protective warmth, the thinly disguised desperation. Without a word, she struck a match and lit the candles. "Happy birthday, little ones," Darlene said softly. Emily leaned closer to the twins. "Make your wish." The children's eyes sparkled in the flickering glow. Ava squeezed her hands together, eyes shut tight, whispering something only she could hear. Noah pursed his lips in concentration, his toy car abandoned on the table. Emily closed her eyes too. She didn't make wishes anymore. Wishes felt childish, dangerous. But tonight she let herself breathe one into the air. Please, just let them feel happy. Just for tonight. The twins blew out the candles together, giggling, their laughter bright enough to briefly drown out the dull ache in Emily's chest. Applause rose unexpectedly from a nearby booth. A few strangers clapped politely, their smiles warm but fleeting, and then Emily felt it. The weight of a stare. She glanced up and froze. Across the diner, in a corner booth half hidden by shadow, sat a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His tie loosened slightly, but his posture upright, composed. His hair slicked back with precision, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. And his eyes, piercing, unblinking, were fixed on her. Damien Cole. The name slammed into her like a stone. Her heart stumbled in her chest, her fingers curling instinctively around the edge of the table. For a second, she thought maybe it wasn't him. Maybe her mind, worn and fractured from too many sleepless nights, was playing tricks on her. But then he lifted his glass of bourbon, the same casual arrogance she remembered, and she knew. It was him, her ex, her children's father, the man who had walked away without ever looking back, and here he was watching her, watching them as if he had every right. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. She lowered her eyes quickly, pulling the twins closer, her hands trembling as she cut the first slice of cake. "Who wants the first piece?" she asked too brightly. "Me!" Ava squealed. "Me too!" Noah echoed, his face lighting up again. Emily pushed the trembling in her hands deep down, slicing the cake into uneven pieces and sliding them onto paper plates. She kissed the tops of their heads, clinging to the ordinary rhythm. But she could still feel it, the heat of Damien's gaze burning through the space between them. Years collapsed in an instant. The hospital room with peeling paint, her body trembling as she cradled 2 infants alone. The endless phone calls he never answered. The corporate headlines flashing his meteoric rise, while she juggled diapers, night shifts, and eviction notices. And now here he was, untouchable, wealthy, powerful, sitting just yards away in a cheap diner where she had scraped together $30 for cake. "Mommy?" Noah's voice tugged her back. He had chocolate frosting smeared on his cheek. "Can Daddy come to my birthday next time?" The knife in Emily's chest twisted deeper. Her hand stilled mid-air. She swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. "Let's just enjoy today, sweetie." "Yeah," Ava added, her eyes dreamy. "Maybe he'll bring balloons." Emily's vision blurred. She blinked furiously, refusing to let tears fall in front of them. Across the diner, Damien's lips curved. Not quite a smile, not quite mockery. Something in between. He raised his glass again, as if to toast the scene. Emily's stomach turned. She wanted to storm over there, to scream at him for daring to watch from the shadows while pretending her children didn't exist. But she stayed seated, rooted by her twins' laughter, their innocence. Instead, she whispered under her breath, words sharp as glass, but meant only for her. "You don't get to take this from me." Not tonight. The cake dwindled to crumbs. The twins pressed their sticky fingers together, making secret wishes Emily didn't dare ask about. She tried to memorize every flicker of their joy, because she knew tomorrow the ache would return. The bills, the silence, the weight of everything she couldn't give them. But tonight she had $30, cracked balloons in her children's eyes, and the promise that they were still hers. And Damien Cole, powerful, ruthless Damien, wasn't a ghost anymore. He was flesh and blood watching. Emily lifted her chin, meeting his gaze across the room just for a moment. Her pulse hammered, her breath shaky. He didn't look away. And that was when Emily understood this wasn't chance, it was the beginning. If you thought this birthday scene was heartbreaking, just wait. In the next chapter, Emily will come face to face with Damien, the millionaire who abandoned her. Secrets will resurface, betrayal will cut deeper, and the quiet war for her twins' future will begin. The laughter of her twins still echoed in Emily's ears, but inside her chest something fragile cracked. She tried to keep smiling, tried to let Ava and Noah lick frosting off their fingers without seeing her hands tremble. But her gaze kept being pulled back, like gravity itself had shifted, toward the corner booth where Damien Cole sat. Her ex. Her ghost, the man she had buried 1,000 times in memory, only for him to resurrect himself tonight of all nights. Emily pressed her palms flat against the table to ground herself. The vinyl seat squeaked as she shifted. For a heartbeat, she let herself hope he would look away, leave, vanish like smoke. But Damien didn't move. He sat back with calculated ease like a king surveying his court. And then she noticed her, the woman beside him, flawless, sleek, every inch of her polished to perfection, honey blonde hair falling in deliberate waves. Diamond earrings that glittered even under the diner's tired fluorescent lights. A pale pink dress tailored so precisely it seemed absurd against the cracked linoleum floors. The fiancé. Emily's stomach turned cold. The woman leaned in, whispering something against Damien's ear. He smirked, that same sharp half-smile Emily had once loved and hated. Then, as if it were rehearsed, the woman's eyes cut across the room and landed squarely on Emily. There was no curiosity in the gaze, only calculation and contempt. Emily looked down quickly, scooping crumbs from the cake into a napkin with shaking fingers. "Mommy," Ava chirped, tugging her sleeve. "Can we take the rest home?" "Of course, sweetheart," Emily said, her voice too bright, too fast. She folded the remains of the cake into a paper box, sealing it with hands that refused to steady. Across from her, Noah spoke softly, almost to himself. "That man looks like me." Emily's breath caught. She froze, the box half closed. Slowly, painfully, she looked at her son. His wide eyes flicked toward Damien's booth. He wasn't wrong. The resemblance was there, the same jawline, the same serious set of the brow, the same way of sitting just a little too upright. Like the world was always watching. "Eat your cake, Noah," Emily whispered, her throat burning, but her mind had already drifted backward. 7 years ago, the hospital room had smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. Emily remembered clutching her swollen belly, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as she waited. She had texted Damien 12 times that night. "They're coming. Please, I need you, please." He never showed. Instead, the doctor had pressed damp newborns into her trembling arms, and she had cried until her chest hurt, not from joy, not only, but from the brutal, suffocating silence of knowing she had been abandoned at the very moment she needed him most. When she finally reached him days later, his voice had been clipped, rehearsed, cruel. "You don't understand, Emily. I can't risk everything I've built. Not now. If word gets out, It could ruin me, ruin him. That was the word he had used while she held two infants with matching eyes. His eyes in a rundown apartment with no heat, and then, like a ghost, he had vanished. Back in the diner, Emily blinked away the memories, but the ache clung like damp clothes. She forced a laugh when Ava smeared frosting across her cheek, pretending the moment wasn't collapsing around her. From the corner booth, Damien raised his glass again. His fiancée's lips curled into something sharp, amused, as if she were in on some private joke. Emily wanted to scream across the room, "You don't get to watch. You don't get to sit here with your diamonds and your bourbon and pretend you don't know them." But her twins, her fragile, innocent twins, sat between her and her rage. She swallowed it whole. "Mommy," Ava piped up, breaking the silence, "can we have balloons next year? Big red ones. And cake with sprinkles?" "Yes, love," Emily said softly, brushing a curl off her daughter's forehead. "Next year." Her throat tightened again, but she steadied her voice. "And every year after that, no matter what. No matter what." The words felt like a promise, an anchor. Noah glanced toward Damien again. "He's still staring, Mommy." Emily forced herself to look. Damien's expression hadn't changed. Composed, unreadable, eyes locked on her as if time itself had stalled. But the fiancé's gaze was different now, sharper, almost triumphant, as if she knew exactly who Emily was. As if Emily was nothing more than a ghost from Damien's past, one that could be dismissed with a glance. Emily gathered her purse, her fingers brushing the folded bills that were already gone, swallowed by tonight's meager celebration. She slid from the booth, her knees stiff, her chest tight. "Time to go." "Kids," she said gently. "But Mommy, the balloons. Next year." "Ava, I promise." She led them toward the door, keeping her chin high even as her skin burned under the weight of Damien's gaze. As she passed his booth, the fiancé shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other. A deliberate movement, like a queen staking her claim. Emily didn't stop, didn't speak. But for one breathless moment her eyes flicked toward Damien's, and in that silence, in that locked gaze, 1,000 unsaid words passed between them. "Why are you here? Why now? Why did you abandon me? Why are you still watching?" Emily's jaw clenched. She broke the stair first, pushing through the diner door into the night air. The cold wrapped around her like steel. The twins skipped ahead, laughing again, their small hands reaching for the stars they believed they could touch. Emily stood for a moment on the cracked pavement, watching them, her chest heaving. Behind her, through the glass window, Damien's reflection lingered. Watching still. He wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was real, present and dangerous, and Emily knew, though she wished she didn't, that tonight had only been the beginning. The ballroom glittered like a galaxy brought down to earth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble floors, and champagne glasses chimed in the hands of tuxedoed men and sequined women. At the center of it all stood Damien Cole, smiling faintly as cameras flashed, his hand resting on the curve of his fiancée's waist. "Tonight," Damien's voice carried through the microphones, smooth and measured, "Cole Enterprises pledges $10 million to children's literacy programs across the nation, because every child deserves a future." Applause thundered. Photographers shouted his name. The fiancée's diamond bracelet, impossible to ignore, caught the light, scattering it like shards across the crowd. She leaned in, kissed his cheek for the cameras, a perfect tableau of wealth and benevolence. But in a cramped apartment across town, Emily scrolled through the newsfeed on her cracked phone screen, her face lit by the glow of Damien's smile. $10 million. She looked up at the ceiling where water stains spread like bruises across plaster. The hum of the old fridge filled the silence. At the small table, Ava and Noah worked on coloring sheets. Their crayons dull from overuse, Emily set the phone face down, bile rising in her throat. "Mommy," Ava said, tugging at her sleeve, "why are you sad?" Emily blinked, snapping back to the present. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just tired." "You're always tired," Noah observed, his voice flat in a way that startled her. He kept coloring, but his eyes flicked up, sharp like his father's. "Why don't we have what he has?" Emily froze. "What do you mean?" He slid the page across the table. He had drawn a stick-figure family in front of a house, except their house leaned, windows cracked. While a tall man in a suit stood beside a perfect mansion, Emily's chest tightened. "Where did you see that?" she whispered. On the TV at school, Ava chimed in, her curls bouncing as she spoke. He was giving money to kids. Everyone clapped. Teacher said he was a hero. Emily gripped the edge of the table, steadying herself. No, not tonight. Not with their innocent faces turned up toward her, waiting. He's just someone who likes to show off, Emily said carefully. We don't need his house. We have each other. But is he our dad? Noah asked suddenly. His eyes locked onto hers, Emily's breath caught. Silence swelled heavy between them. She forced a smile, though it felt brittle, false. You have everything you need right here. She tapped their little hearts with her finger. Me and each other. That's all that matters. Ava seemed satisfied, but Noah studied her longer, as if peeling back layers she wasn't ready to reveal. Across town, Damien and his fiancée lounged on leather sofas in a penthouse that overlooked the glittering skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a trophy. You saw her, didn't you? The fiancée asked, swirling her wine. Her tone was casual, but her eyes gleamed. Damien sipped his bourbon, silent. At that diner, where are the children? She tilted her head, blonde hair falling over one shoulder. You didn't think I wouldn't notice? Damien's jaw tightened. They looked like you. She let the words hang in the air, poisonous and sweet. But don't worry. I'll make sure she disappears. People like her don't survive in our world. He shot her a sharp look. Don't what? She smiled thinly. Don't protect my place in your life. Don't clean up the mess you left behind? Damien set his glass down harder than he meant to. This isn't your concern, but she leaned in, her voice a hiss. Everything you touch is my concern. If she thinks she can crawl back into your life, into your empire, she'll regret it. Her diamond bracelet caught the light again, flashing like a blade. At midnight, Emily scrubbed tables in a bar that smelled of beer and bleach. Her hands were raw, her back aching. She stacked chairs, humming softly to keep herself awake. Her co-worker, Marcy, glanced over. Are you hear about Damien Cole on the news? Man's practically buying sainthood. Emily forced a laugh. Yeah, I heard. You okay? Emily shrugged, gripping the rag tighter. Fine, just fine. But inside she was breaking. She remembered every rejection email, every job interview that ended with polite smiles and hidden judgment once her swollen belly had shown. She remembered crying over utility shut-off notices while news stations broadcast Damien's record-breaking IPO. Diamonds for him, dust for her, and now? The twins were asking questions. Emily slipped quietly into her children's room. They slept tangled together under a thin blanket, Ava's hand draped protectively over Noah's chest. Their faces were peaceful, unmarked by the shadows of betrayal that clung to Emily. She sank into the old chair by the window, burying her face in her hands. Her mind screamed, "How long can you keep lying?" How long before they find out who he is? She thought of Damien's fiancée, her diamond smile, her cutting eyes. The woman hadn't just looked at Emily in the diner. She had assessed her, weighed her, decided she was disposable. Emily shivered. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't over. The woman wasn't going to let her fade quietly into the background, and Damien, he had watched. Said nothing, done nothing. The silence of his absence was one thing, but the silence of his presence, that was worse. Emily stared out the window at the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there he lived in his towers of glass and steel, wrapped in wealth, insulated by power. She looked back at her twins. Their small chests rose and fell in steady rhythm, and Emily whispered a vow into the night. He won't erase us. Not this time. I don't care how much money he has. I don't care who she is. You are mine, and I will fight for you. Her voice shook, but the vow stood. Diamonds glittered for him. Dust suffocated her, but even dust could rise when the storm came. The rain had seeped through the window frame again. Emily pressed another rag into the sill, her hands trembling with exhaustion. It was Saturday, her one day off, but the apartment didn't let her rest. Leaks, bills, meals to stretch, it was endless. She moved toward the closet, meaning only to grab a sweater, but her hand knocked down an old shoebox from the top shelf. It tumbled, the lid scattering, and papers, receipts, and folded envelopes spilled across the floor. Emily crouched down, her heart quickening. She hadn't touched this box in years. It was where she shoved things she couldn't bear to face, hospital forms, eviction warnings, and unsent letters addressed to Damien. Her hands shook as she gathered the contents. That was when she saw it. A photograph bent at the corner, half hidden beneath a stack of medical bills. Her breath caught. In the picture, Damien held one of the twins, swaddled and red-faced from birth. His arms, steady, confident, cradled the child with a familiarity that shattered every lie he had ever told. His face was turned slightly, and though the smile was faint, the look was unmistakable, he knew. He had always known. Emily sank to the floor, clutching the photo as if it might burn her fingers. Tears blurred her vision, spilling freely now. She remembered that day vividly. The chaos of the hospital room, the storm outside, the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, he would stay. He hadn't. He had told the world he knew nothing. He had told her he couldn't risk his empire. And yet here he was, frozen in a stolen moment, holding their child as though the truth had never been hidden. "Mommy?" Ava's voice startled her. Emily turned, fumbling to wipe her cheeks. Ava stood barefoot in the doorway, her curls messy from a nap. "What's that?" Ava asked, pointing to the photo in Emily's hand. Emily's throat closed. She couldn't lie fast enough. She set the photo face down. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just old papers." But Ava padded forward, quick and curious. Before Emily could stop her, she snatched up the picture and studied it. Her little brow furrowed. "That's Noah." Emily froze. "No," she began carefully, but Ava's eyes lit up with recognition. "And that's the man from the diner. Mommy, look, it's him. It's Daddy." The word hit like glass shattering. From the bedroom, Noah stirred, his voice groggy. "Daddy?" Emily panicked. "It's late, both of you, back to bed." But Noah had already climbed off the mattress and joined his sister, squinting at the photo. His lips parted. "It really is. Mommy, why didn't you tell us?" Emily's chest heaved. She reached for the photo, but Noah clutched it tight. His small hands fierce. "You said we don't need him," Ava whispered. Confused. "But you never said he was real." Emily closed her eyes. The weight of the moment pressing down on her ribs. She knelt in front of them, her voice raw. "Listen to me. I have always given you everything I could. I kept you safe. That's what matters. But he's our dad," Noah said simply. His voice was steady, certain. "Why doesn't he live with us? Why doesn't he come?" Emily broke. She sank onto her knees fully, pulling them both into her arms. They resisted for a moment, still clutching the photograph between them, but then melted into her embrace. "Because he made a choice," she whispered into their hair. Her tears soaked into their curls. "He chose himself, not us. Not you." The words cracked something inside her even as she spoke them. Ava's voice was muffled against her shoulder. "Will he ever come back?" Emily shook her head fiercely. "No, but I am here, always, forever." She held them tighter, as if sheer force could protect them from the truth unraveling in their small hands. Later, after the twins had fallen back asleep, though fitfully, clutching each other tighter than usual, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table. The photograph lay in front of her, the edges worn, the image damning. Her mind spun. She could use it. If she showed the world this picture, Damien's carefully constructed lie would crumble. He could no longer claim ignorance. The empire he'd built on the illusion of spotless image would crack under scandal. But the cost, court battles, lawyer fees she couldn't dream of affording. Damien's power, his lawyers, his reach. He could bury her before she even set foot in a courtroom. Her fingers dug into the edge of the table. "Do you want revenge, Emily? Or do you want peace?" Her own voice echoed back, hollow. Peace wasn't possible anymore. Not after Ava and Noah had spoken the word she had dreaded for years. Daddy. The photograph wasn't just proof of betrayal. It was a weapon. But it was also a wound freshly opened, bleeding faster than she could stop it. Emily pressed her forehead against the table, whispering through gritted teeth, "You won't erase me." "You won't erase them." The silence of the apartment answered back. At a private gala after-party, Damien laughed mechanically at some investor's joke, but his fiancée noticed his distraction. "You're brooding," she said, sipping champagne. He shook his head. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Her eyes narrowed. "You're thinking about her. About those children." Damien's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. She smirked, setting down her glass. "Then let's make sure she doesn't exist long enough to matter." Back at the apartment, Emily folded the photo carefully into her wallet, sliding it into the inner pocket where it pressed against her heart. She looked in at the twins, their tiny forms curled together, safe in fragile sleep. Her tears had dried, leaving only raw determination. "This ends," she whispered. "No more silence. No more hiding. He doesn't get to live like we're invisible." Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of a vow. She reached over, smoothing the blanket over her children. Their little faces looked so much like his, and yet they were hers, entirely hers. And tonight, for the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing. The storm was coming, and she would not face it bowed. The shoebox sat heavy in Emily's lap, its edges frayed from years of being shoved to the back of closets, under beds, anywhere she could keep it out of sight. Tonight, though, she couldn't ignore it. The photograph had cracked something open inside her, and once the silence broke, everything she had stuffed away demanded to be heard again. She lifted the lid slowly, as though the box itself might explode, and the smell of old paper and ink rose up to greet her. Inside were envelopes in different stages of wear, some neat, some crumpled, all unsent. Her hand trembled as she picked up the first one. "Dear Damien," she read silently, her own handwriting shaking across the page. "I don't know how else to reach you. I don't need much, just enough for diapers and formula. Please, they cry at night and I don't know what to do. I can't do this alone." The ink blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she kept reading. She remembered writing that letter at the kitchen table in their old apartment, one baby on her chest and the other screaming in a bassinet. She had written until her knuckles cramped, then sealed the envelope and placed it by the door. But she never mailed it. She had been too afraid of his rejection, too afraid of being humiliated again. She set the letter aside and grabbed another, this one angrier, the lines carved deep into the paper. "You think you can erase me? Erase them. You don't get to pretend we never existed. You don't get to build your empire on my bones. One day you'll see what you threw away. One day you'll pay." Her breath hitched. She remembered that night too, how she had pounded out the words in a haze of rage. The twins finally asleep, her body aching from a double shift at the diner. She hadn't mailed that one either. Some part of her had feared the consequences, the sheer imbalance of power between them. Her fury had been real but powerless. One by one she read them all. Pleas, apologies, threats, confessions of loneliness so raw they made her stomach turn even now. Each letter was a fragment of her broken motherhood, a mirror of who she had been in those desperate years. And each one reminded her that she had been screaming into silence, hoping someone who had already chosen to leave might still listen. Her tears stained the pages until the words blurred, but she didn't stop. She had to feel it all, had to let it burn through her, because for too long she had tried to protect herself from her own pain, and it had left her hollow. Tonight, she allowed herself to bleed on the inside. When a knock sounded at her door, she nearly jumped out of her skin. She scrambled to shove the letters back into the box, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. Opening the door, she found Marcy, her co-worker from the bar, standing there with a bag of leftover sandwiches. "Thought you might need these," Marcy said, her eyes darting to Emily's tear-streaked face. "Bad night?" Emily forced a laugh. "Something like that." But Marcy's expression shifted, guilt flickering across her features. I ran into someone tonight. At that charity event downtown. Damien Cole's fiancée." Emily's blood went cold. "What? She knows about you," Marcy whispered. "She made sure I knew it too. Said some things, cruel things. She called you pathetic. Said you were nothing but a stain he should have scrubbed out of his life a long time ago." Emily's stomach clenched so violently she thought she might be sick. "She said that?" Marcy nodded, and she laughed. Like it was funny. Like your whole life, your struggle, was just some dirty secret to her. Emily's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the doorframe. Rage surged through her chest, hot and uncontrollable. For years she had swallowed her pain, lived quietly, raised her children without complaint. But this mockery, this deliberate erasure, ignited something deeper. "She thinks I'll disappear," Emily said, her voice low, trembling. "She thinks she can erase me." "Erase my children? No, not anymore." Marcy hesitated. "Emily, what are you going to do?" Emily didn't answer right away. She looked back at the shoebox on the table, the unsent letters glowing under the dim lamplight like embers. She had been silenced for too long, trapped in fear of Damien's power, his wealth, his reach. But those letters had taught her something, Silence hadn't protected her. It had only kept her invisible. "I'm going to fight," she said finally, her voice steadying with every word. "I don't know how yet, but I will. For Ava, for Noah. They deserve the truth. And he deserves to face what he's done." Marcy's eyes widened, half in fear, half in awe. "Emily, that's dangerous. He has lawyers, connections. He'll crush you." Emily lifted her chin. "Then let him try. He already crushed me once. I survived. And I won't let him do it to my children." After Marcy left, Emily sat back down at the table, staring at the shoebox. She pulled out one more letter, one she barely remembered writing. The words were softer, more fragile. "I still love you. God help me, I still do. But every day that love is turning into something else, something darker. If you ever come back, you'll find a woman you don't recognize." Emily pressed the letter to her chest, her tears finally drying. That woman was here now, the one he wouldn't recognize. Not broken, not begging, but ready. She thought of Ava's wide eyes, Noah's steady voice asking about their father. She thought of the fiancé's smug expression, her cruel words. And she thought of Damien, silent, watching, pretending his empire was untouchable. Emily wiped her face and reached for her phone. The number she dialed wasn't Damien's. It was a local law office she had passed by every day on her way to work. For years she had told herself she couldn't afford it, that even making the call was pointless. But tonight, the weight of those letters in her lap gave her courage. "Law offices of Harrison and Lowe," a receptionist's voice answered. Emily's throat felt tight, but she forced the words out. "I need to speak to someone about a paternity case." The silence that followed was short, professional. But to Emily it felt like the ground shifting beneath her feet. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was taking the first step into war. She hung up, her heart racing, and shoved the letters back into the box. They had never reached him, but they had reached her. They were reminders of everything she had endured, everything she had carried, and everything she was about to fight for. Emily sat in the dark, her hands pressed together, whispering to herself like a prayer. "You won't erase us, not now, not ever." The papers were filed on a Tuesday morning. The sky outside the courthouse was dull gray, heavy with the promise of rain, but Emily felt a strange clarity in her chest as she walked down the stone steps with the receipt of her filing clutched in her hand. She had done it. After years of silence, of swallowing her pride and shielding her twins from questions she couldn't bear to answer, she had put Damien Cole's name on record as their father. By Wednesday, the world knew. Her cracked phone buzzed relentlessly with news alerts. Headlines screamed across her screen: "Millionaire CEO faces secret twins allegation." Charity darling or family fraud? Who is the woman behind the claims? She read them in the dim light of her apartment, while her twins ate cereal at the table, blissfully unaware. She hid the phone under a stack of bills when Ava asked for more milk. By Thursday, the tabloids had pictures of her. Paparazzi had dug up grainy shots of her leaving her night job, hair tied back, exhaustion etched into her face. They paired them beside photos of Damien in tailored suits, stepping out of black cars, his fiancée glittering at his side. The contrast was brutal, deliberate, diamonds against dust. And by Friday, Damien responded. He stood at a press conference flanked by his lawyers and his fiancée. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. His expression was grave, practiced. "These allegations are false," he said smoothly. "I sympathize with Ms. Taylor's situation, but I have never fathered any children outside of my relationship. These claims are an attack on my reputation and my company. I intend to fight them with the full weight of the law." The fiancée stood close, her hand on his arm, her diamond ring flashing as though to seal the performance. Emily watched from her couch, her twins playing on the floor, and rage flooded her veins so fiercely she thought she might choke on it. The first court summons arrived the following week. Damien's lawyers moved fast, filing motions to dismiss, accusing Emily of attempting extortion. The language on the papers stung. Bitter woman, desperate for money, fabricating claims for personal gain. She sat at her kitchen table, the legal documents spread in front of her lawyer across from her. "They're going to attack your character," Ms. Ramirez said, her tone matter-of-fact. "They'll dig into your jobs, your debt, your personal history. They'll try to make you look unstable, unreliable." Emily swallowed hard. "They'll use everything against me." Yes, Ramirez said. But you have the truth. And you have evidence. Emily's fingers drifted to her wallet where the photograph still rested. Her secret weapon. Ramirez leaned forward. Are you ready for that kind of fight? Once this starts, there's no stepping back. Emily's throat tightened, but she forced herself to nod. I've been stepping back my whole life. Not anymore. The chaos seeped into her home. Ava tugged at her sleeve one night after school. Mommy, why were kids talking about us? They said Daddy's on TV. Emily froze. What did they say? That we're liars, Ava whispered, her eyes glistening. That Daddy said we don't exist. Noah's jaw tightened beside her, his small fists clenched. They're wrong. Emily pulled them both close, holding them tightly, her voice fierce even as it broke. You are not liars. You are real. You are mine. No one can ever take that away. Ava sniffled against her shoulder. Then why doesn't he want us? The question gutted her. Emily bit back tears, stroking their hair, whispering, because sometimes people choose wrong. But that doesn't make you wrong. It makes him weak. She stayed awake long after they had fallen asleep, the silence filled with the echoes of their questions. Her heart ached, but beneath the ache was fire. Damien's lawyers came for her in the courtroom next. They painted her as a scorned woman, a waitress desperate for relevance, a liar hungry for money. They held up her bank statements, her eviction notices, her second job as if they were evidence of fraud instead of survival. Ms. Taylor, one of them sneered across the courtroom, you claim to be motivated by justice, but isn't it true you're motivated by financial desperation? Emily's voice trembled, but she steadied it. I'm motivated by my children. The lawyer's smile was cruel. Children you claim belong to my client, though he denies it. Emily's hand shook on the witness stand, but she forced her voice louder. He can deny it all he wants, but the truth doesn't vanish because he's rich enough to bury it. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Damien's jaw tightened where he sat at the defense table. Outside, reporters swarmed her as she left, their questions sharp, merciless. Emily, are you doing this for a payout? Why now? Why after all these years? And do you have proof? She kept her head down, clutching Ava and Noah's hands as they shuffled past the cameras. The flashes blinded her, but her children's small grips grounded her. She whispered to them, almost home. Just keep walking. That night she collapsed on the couch, her head in her hands. Her lawyer's words echoed in her mind. They'll make this a war. And wars take everything, Emily whispered into the dark. Then let it take everything. I have nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, Damien's empire began to tremble. Stockholders demanded answers. Charities quietly distanced themselves. The fiancée smiled through gritted teeth at public events. Her hand on his arm tighter now, her whispers sharper. She's not going away, she hissed one night when the cameras were gone. And if you think you can keep me standing here while she drags your name through the mud, you're wrong. Damien poured himself another bourbon, his mask cracking for the first time. She won't win. The fiancée tilted her head, her smile sharp as glass. Make sure of it. Back in her apartment, Emily tucked her twins into bed, brushing their foreheads with trembling fingers. They clung to her tighter now, sensing the storm even if they didn't understand its scope. She sat by the window afterward, staring at the city lights in the distance. Each glow reminded her of him, his towers, his wealth, his reach. But she reminded herself of the shadows, too, the cracks in his foundation. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a battle cry. You can call me bitter. You can call me desperate, but you will never call my children invisible. And with that vow, Emily steeled herself. The war had begun, and she would fight it to the last breath. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, but to Emily it felt like the air itself was sharp with judgment. Reporters crowded the benches in the back, pens poised, cameras waiting outside. The judge sat stern and unmoved at the bench, while Damien's lawyers, 3 of them in immaculate suits, prepared their folders like generals laying out a war plan. Emily sat stiffly at the witness stand, her palms damp, her throat tight. She caught Damien's eye only once, and the cool detachment in his expression cut deeper than any insult. He sat beside his fiancée, who radiated smug composure, her diamond-studded fingers draped over his arm, as though to remind the room who really belonged at his side. The opposing lawyer rose. Ms. Taylor, he began, his voice silk over steel, you claim my client fathered your children, And yet for years you made no legal claim. Isn't it true that you only came forward now because you're in financial distress? Emily's hands clenched in her lap. I came forward because my children deserve the truth. The lawyer smiled thinly. Of course, the truth. He let the word hang like poison. And isn't it also true that you wrote letters to my client? Letters you never sent. Letters full of anger and threats. Emily's chest tightened. Her shoebox of unsent words had somehow made its way into their arsenal. Those letters were never meant for him, she said quietly. And yet they exist, the lawyer pressed, lifting a photocopy of one. You don't get to build your empire on my bones. One day you'll pay. He read the line with relish, then turned to the jury. Does that sound like a woman seeking justice or revenge? Murmurs rippled across the room. Emily swallowed hard. I was exhausted, alone. I was venting my pain on paper. That doesn't make my children any less his. The lawyer pounced. But it does make you unreliable, emotional, perhaps even unstable. Heat rose up Emily's neck. Her breath quickened. For a moment, the walls of the courtroom dissolved and she was back in that hospital room, alone with 2 newborns and no one to call. Back in that freezing apartment, counting coins for formula while the news showed Damien cutting ribbons at charity galas. Trauma flooded her veins, threatening to drown her voice. She forced herself to breathe, steady for them. For Ava and Noah, the lawyer leaned closer. You've offered no proof, no paternity test, nothing but your word, which is clearly compromised. Emily's gaze flicked to her lawyer, Ms. Ramirez, who gave the slightest nod. Emily's trembling hands reached into her folder. That's not true. The courtroom hushed as Emily pulled out a stack of papers, edges worn, ink faded but legible. She held them up, her voice steady now. These are hospital bills. From the night my children were born. She handed them to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. The judge peered through his glasses. Continue. Emily's voice cut through the silence. Every one of these bills lists Damien Cole as the guarantor. His signature is right there, next to mine. He knew he was there. He signed his name. Gasps erupted. The sound filled the courtroom like a storm breaking. Reporters scribbled furiously, phones buzzing with breaking alerts. For the first time, Damien's mask cracked. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. He shifted in his seat, no longer the untouchable CEO, but a man suddenly vulnerable. Emily's gaze locked on him, her voice rising. You told the world you never knew about them. But here it is. Your name, your hand, your lie. The fiancée stiffened beside him, her diamond smile gone. She turned sharply, her heels clacking against the marble floor as she stormed out of the courtroom. The sound echoed, leaving a jagged silence behind. The lawyer scrambled, flipping through the papers as though he could erase what was already written. These could be forged. They're originals, Emily snapped. Her trembling had stopped. Her voice was iron now. They've been in the hospital's records for years. Ask them, verify them. You can't erase the truth. The jury's eyes shifted. Their expressions no longer skeptical but shaken. The judge rapped his gavel for order, but the electricity in the room was impossible to contain. Damien finally spoke, his voice low but audible. You don't know what you're doing, Emily. She turned her eyes on him, unflinching. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm making sure our children are seen. The word "our" landed heavy. Damien flinched. The lawyer attempted to recover, but the damage was done. The bills were entered into evidence. The whispers in the courtroom had turned. For the first time, Emily wasn't just the desperate mother. They saw her as the woman who had carried proof, who had endured silence, who now demanded recognition. As the judge adjourned for the day, Emily stood slowly, her knees weak but her spine straight. The reporters surged forward as she exited, microphones flashing. Emily, how did you find the bills? Did Damien ever admit it to you? What will you do if he continues to deny it? She ignored them all, her lawyer clearing a path through the swarm. Outside, the air hit her face like a baptism, cool and sharp. She drew in a breath that felt deeper than any she'd taken in years. Her children were waiting at home. She pictured Ava's curls, Noah's quiet, watchful eyes. For them, she had faced humiliation, brutal questions, every attempt to erase her. And for them, she had turned the tide. Emily whispered to herself as the cameras clicked. You can't bury us anymore. Inside the courthouse, Damien remained seated at the defense table. The papers spread before him like a mirror of his betrayal. His lawyer muttered frantically in his ear, But Damien wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the door where Emily had disappeared, and for the first time he looked afraid. The headlines wouldn't stop multiplying. Every morning, Emily woke to another blast of Damien's downfall plastered across her phone screen. Coal Enterprises plunges amid paternity scandal. Investors demand answers. Who is Emily Taylor? From boardroom to bedroom, Damien Cole's double life. She didn't need to buy papers. The tabloids shouted at her from every corner store, her face printed grainy and unflattering next to Damien's polished profile. Strangers whispered when she passed. Some looked at her with pity, others with venom, but what the public didn't see was the cost, the exhaustion that bent her bones. Court dates piled on. Her lawyer's fees bled her savings dry. Every cross-examination scraped another layer off her already frayed nerves. Nights blurred into mornings as she tried to work shifts, prepare for hearings, and still tuck Ava and Noah into bed with a smile. One evening she collapsed onto the couch, her body refusing to move. Her chest heaved, her head throbbed. She stared at the ceiling crack that spread like a spiderweb above her and thought, I can't do this anymore. Mommy. Ava's small hand touched her arm. Emily turned her head. Ava's curls framed her face, her eyes wide with concern. Noah stood just behind her, clutching his toy car. You're tired, Noah said softly. Emily forced herself to sit up, pulling them both into her lap, though her muscles screamed. Yes, but I'll never be too tired for you. They wrapped their little arms around her neck, and the warmth of their embrace cut through the fatigue. Ava whispered, We'll help you, Mommy. We'll be strong too. Emily buried her face in their hair, letting silent tears fall. Their innocence, their faith. It was the only thing keeping her upright. Meanwhile, Damien's empire trembled. In boardrooms high above the city, men in suits shouted over balance sheets. We're hemorrhaging money, one investor barked. If this scandal doesn't end, neither does our confidence. Damien sat at the head of the table, silent, his jaw set. He had weathered corporate storms before, but this was different. This wasn't numbers. This was blood, his blood. His fiancée, seated at his side, leaned in with a brittle smile. Handle it, Damien. Or someone else will. Her diamond ring caught the light, but her grip on his wrist was anything but gentle. Back in the courthouse, Emily faced another round of battle. Her lawyer, Ramirez, stood firm at her side. We're not just pushing for acknowledgement anymore, Ramirez told Damien's counsel. We're demanding child support and back pay. 7 years' worth, the opposing lawyer scoffed. You think you'll bleed him dry? Ramirez's voice was sharp. We're not bleeding him. We're asking him to take responsibility for the children he abandoned. Emily stood quietly, her fingers twisting in front of her. She hated being in these rooms, hated the way lawyers spoke of Ava and Noah as if they were bargaining chips. But she also knew Ramirez was right. She had come too far to back down now. When the judge ordered Damien to produce financial documents, Emily felt a spark of triumph. But it was short-lived, because Damien decided to corner her. It happened in the courthouse hallway after a hearing. The marble floor echoed with footsteps, lawyers rushing past. But for a moment, Emily found herself alone, gathering her files. Then she heard his voice. Emily, her body froze. Slowly she turned. Damien stood just a few feet away, his presence filling the space like a shadow. He wore a charcoal suit, immaculate as always, but his eyes were colder than she remembered. You think you're winning, he said, his tone low, dangerous. You're not. You're tearing yourself apart, and for what? A payout? Recognition? Do you think this ends well for you? Emily's heart pounded, but she forced her shoulders back. This isn't about me. It's about them. His jaw tightened. You're playing with fire. My world doesn't forgive. If you keep pushing, I'll bury you in ways you can't imagine. Her throat went dry, but rage pushed her words forward. You already buried me once. I lived through it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. You're making enemies you can't fight. Investors, the press, people with power. You're dragging children into a war they don't understand. Emily's voice cracked, but she didn't back away. You dragged them into it the moment you denied they existed. Damien's eyes flashed. You'll regret this. Her hands trembled, but she stood her ground. I'd rather have nothing, she said, her voice raw, fierce, trembling with conviction. Then owe you everything. The words seemed to hang in the hallway, shattering the silence like glass. For the first time, Damien faltered. His mask slipped just enough for her to see the flicker of fury beneath, the wounded pride of a man unused to defiance. He turned sharply, his shoes striking the marble, leaving her standing alone with her breath ragged and her knees weak. But she didn't collapse. Not this time. That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table with Ramirez, going over documents by lamplight. Her eyes burned from exhaustion. Her body ached, but the fire inside her hadn't dimmed. "Are you sure you can keep going?" Ramirez asked gently. Emily thought of Damien in the hallway, of his threat, of the children curled together in their bed. She nodded. "He wants me broken. But if I break, my children learn that silence is safer than truth. I won't teach them that." Ramirez gave her a rare smile. "Then we fight. Harder." The next morning, Emily walked Ava and Noah to school. Parents stared, whispers trailing behind her, but she kept her chin high. At the school gate, Ava squeezed her hand. "Mommy, did Daddy talk to you?" Emily knelt down, brushing her daughter's cheek. "Yes, sweetheart. But it doesn't change anything. You're mine, always." Noah studied her face, his serious eyes too old for his age. "You're not scared?" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled faintly. "Not anymore." She kissed their foreheads, watching them run inside, their backpacks bouncing. For a moment, she let herself breathe. The war was far from over. Damien still had wealth, influence, and rage on his side. But Emily had something stronger, the truth, her children, and a resolve that could no longer be shattered. Even if everything around her cracked like glass, she would not bow. The air inside the courtroom was heavier than any Emily had ever breathed. The walls seemed to close in around her, every scrape of a chair or shuffle of papers amplified like a thunderclap. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens poised like weapons, cameras waiting outside for the storm that was about to break. Emily sat at the petitioner's table, her hands clasped so tightly together, her knuckles ached. Across the aisle, Damien looked carved from stone. His jaw was clenched, his gaze fixed on the judge, but the faint twitch at his temple betrayed him. His fiancée was nowhere to be seen. She hadn't returned since storming out during cross-examination. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented. The hospital documents, financial records, and testimony have been weighed carefully." Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She felt Ms. Ramirez's steady presence at her side, but it was the memory of Ava and Noah's faces that kept her upright. Their questions, their innocent hope, their right to the truth. The judge continued, each word landing with the weight of years. "It is the finding of this court that Mr. Damien Cole is the biological father of the minor children." Gasps erupted. The gallery buzzed, pens scratching furiously, whispers breaking like waves. Emily's breath caught. For a moment she thought she had misheard. The judge raised a hand for silence. Accordingly, Mr. Cole is ordered to provide financial support, retroactive child support, and to acknowledge the children publicly. His denial of their existence is hereby overturned by legal recognition. Emily's vision blurred with tears, but they were not tears of defeat. They were release. 7 years of silence, of humiliation, of scraping survival out of dust, broken apart in one ruling. Beside her, Ramirez squeezed her arm. "You won, Emily." Emily pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her chest heaved, not from exhaustion this time, but from a weight finally lifted. She turned and for a split second caught Damien's face. He sat frozen, humiliated, his empire cracking around him in real time. His eyes, once so confident, now burned with something closer to panic. The gallery erupted again, reporters nearly falling over one another as they bolted for the doors. The verdict was already on its way to the outside world. Damien's lawyer leaned close, hissing something in his ear, but he didn't move. He looked gutted, stripped bare. Emily rose slowly, her knees trembling but her spine straight. As she gathered her things, she thought of Ava and Noah waiting at home, how their little arms would wrap around her when she told them, "He cannot deny you anymore." The bailiff opened the doors and the hallway beyond roared with noise. Cameras flashed like lightning. Questions flew like arrows. "Emily, how do you feel? What will you tell your children? Do you have a message for Damien Cole?" Emily shielded her eyes, Ramirez clearing a path, but then she felt it, a familiar presence just behind her. She turned. Damien had followed, flanked by his remaining lawyers, but the cameras weren't looking at them the same way anymore. They weren't fawning. They were feeding. His polished image had shattered, And now they saw him for what he was. A liar, a man stripped of control. For one suspended moment, their eyes locked. Emily's tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving her face raw but unbroken. Damien looked as though he might speak, but no words came. His mouth opened, then shut, his jaw tightening in defeat. Emily didn't stop walking. She pushed past him, each step a quiet triumph. Outside, the courthouse steps overflowed with reporters. The noise was deafening, but Emily's world narrowed when she spotted two small figures waiting in the crowd. Ava and Noah holding hands, their faces anxious until they saw her. "Mommy!" Ava shouted, breaking free and running into her arms. Noah followed, clutching her tightly. Emily sank to her knees, wrapping them both in her embrace. The cameras flashed wildly, the moment seared into public record. The woman, once invisible, now undeniable, holding her children in victory. "Mommy, what happened?" Noah asked, his eyes wide. Emily cupped his face, her voice steady. "The truth happened. He can't deny you anymore. You're free." Ava's curls brushed Emily's cheek as she whispered, "So, we really have a daddy?" Emily's throat tightened. She chose her words carefully. "You have someone who shares your blood. But love is what makes a parent. And you'll always have that with me." They hugged her tighter, their small bodies pressed against her, and Emily felt the strength she had fought for flowing back into her. Behind them, Damien emerged. The cameras swarmed, questions hurled like stones. His security pushed people aside, but no amount of power could erase the truth now written in court records, printed on headlines, etched in the eyes of his children. His empire, his engagement, his reputation, all of it crumbled as Emily walked past with the only treasures that mattered. Back at the apartment that evening, Emily lit 2 candles on the kitchen table. Ava and Noah sat close, their faces glowing in the soft light. The hum of the fridge was the only sound until Emily whispered, "Make a wish." The twins squeezed their eyes shut, blowing out the candles together. When they opened them, their smiles were wide, unburdened in a way Emily hadn't seen before. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pulling at her, but beneath it was something new. Not survival, not fear, something steadier, freedom. She thought of Damien, of the cameras, of his frozen expression in the courtroom. His shadow would linger, but he no longer controlled the light. Emily took her children's hands, whispering to herself more than to them, "We're not invisible anymore." And for the first time in years, she believed it. The backyard smelled of grilled burgers and cut grass, the air warm with late spring. A folding table stood in the corner, draped with a faded tablecloth, its edges weighted down by mismatched plates and a cake Emily had baked herself. The frosting wasn't perfect, slightly lopsided, smudged by Ava's eager fingers, but to Emily, it was the most beautiful cake she had ever seen. Balloons bobbed lazily in the breeze tied to the old wooden fence. Bright reds, yellows, and blues. Nothing extravagant, but this time there were enough to fill the yard with color. Enough to make Ava and Noah's laughter ring like bells instead of echo in the hollow of want. Emily leaned against the doorway, watching as the twins raced across the yard with their friends, shrieking with joy. Their cheeks flushed, their eyes sparkling. For the first time, they weren't looking over their shoulders. They weren't asking questions she couldn't answer. They were free, Mommy. Ava called, her curls flying as she darted toward the table. "It's time for cake." Emily smiled, carrying the candles. All right. Gather up." The children crowded around the table, their little hands pressing into the plastic cloth, their voices bubbling with excitement. Emily lit the candles, her fingers steady despite the breeze. "Make your wish," she whispered. Ava squeezed her eyes shut, lips moving in silent prayer. Noah held his breath, his expression fierce with concentration, before the two leaned in together, blowing out the flames in unison. Smoke curled into the air, vanishing into the open sky. Their friends clapped and cheered, but Emily stood still for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on that faint trail of smoke. It rose, twisted, and then disappeared into the blue, carrying with it the years of silence and shame she had endured. "Mommy," Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Aren't you going to make a wish too?" Emily bent down, kissing his forehead. "I don't need to anymore. Mine already came true." Later, after cake and games, the children gathered in the yard, each holding a balloon. Emily had spent the last of her extra cash on them, not because balloons were necessary, but because they symbolized something bigger. Something she wanted them to feel. "Okay," she called out, her voice carrying over the chatter. On the count of 3, everyone let go. The kids giggled, tightening their grips. 1, she counted. Ava and Noah locked eyes, grinning. 2, Emily's throat tightened, but her smile didn't falter. 3, a chorus of laughter erupted as balloons soared upward, their colors bright against the endless sky. Some rose quickly, others snagged momentarily on branches before breaking free. The children shouted, pointing, racing to see whose balloon went the highest. Emily watched one red balloon as it drifted higher, higher, until it was a dot barely visible against the sunlit blue. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That balloon was everything, her grief, her anger, her shame, floating out of reach at last. Inside the house, on the coffee table, lay a folded newspaper. The headline screamed Damien's name again. Gall Enterprises scrambles after court verdict. His face stared up from the page, grim and cornered. Rumors of his fiancée ending their engagement, whispers of boardroom coups, charity partners pulling back. His empire was still shaking. Emily hadn't read past the headline. She didn't need to. His downfall was no longer her burden. Still, the shadow lingered, as shadows do. She knew her children would grow older and ask again. She knew the world would never stop talking about him. But the difference now was that Damien's silence no longer defined them. Her truth had been spoken, carved into record, undeniable. "Mommy," Ava said, climbing into her lap as the party wound down. Her face was sticky with frosting, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Can we have balloons every year?" Emily kissed her curls. "Every single year." Noah curled against her other side, his toy car still in hand. "Will Daddy ever come to see us?" The question cut deep, but Emily's voice was calm, steady. "Maybe one day he'll try, but whether he does or not, you'll always have me. And you'll always have each other." Ava snuggled closer. "That's enough." Tears stung Emily's eyes, but this time she didn't hide them. She let them fall, not from pain, but from the overwhelming swell of love. She looked around the yard, the laughter still echoing, the balloons fading into the sky, and felt for the first time in years, whole. As evening fell, the guests trickled out. Emily stood in the quiet yard, the grass trampled from little feet, paper plates stacked high. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of extinguished candles and fresh air. The world had tried to erase her. Damien had tried to silence her. But here, in this small backyard filled with echoes of joy, she had reclaimed everything that mattered. Her children, her voice, herself. She turned to see Ava and Noah running barefoot in the twilight, chasing fireflies that blinked like stars. Their laughter carried on the breeze, light and unburdened. Emily smiled, whispering into the darkening sky. "We're free now." And somewhere far above, a red balloon drifted higher still, carrying the last of her broken years into the night. This story may be over, but what if it isn't? Should Emily's fight end here, or does Damien deserve one last confrontation? If you want to see part 2, let us know in the comments below. Your voice decides what happens next.